It started, as these things often do, with a move, not out of desire, but necessity. My old place, a cramped box overlooking a perpetually gray alley, was being demolished. Rent in the city is a nightmare, as you know. A slow strangulation by numbers on a page. Then I found it online, the Penumbra Building. The name itself should have been a warning, a smudge of ink on the city map, brooding and gothic even in the low-resolution photos. But the rent was a siren song, impossibly low for its size and location, a figure that seemed almost like a typo, a glitch in the otherwise ruthless system of urban housing. I told myself it was just an old building, poorly managed perhaps, hence the price, a steal. That's what I told myself. My name is Kaylin. I work remotely as a digital archivist, a job that suits my temperament perfectly. Ordering the chaotic digital detritus of others gives me a sense of control I rarely feel elsewhere. People are unpredictable, loud, their edges too sharp. I suppose you could say I lean towards agoraphobia, though I never sought a formal diagnosis. Crowds make my skin prickle. Open spaces feel too exposed. My apartment is my sanctuary, a curated space where the outside world is kept at bay by thick curtains and the steady rhythm of my keyboard. This need for isolation, for a predictable environment, was perhaps why the Penumbra Building appealed, on some subconscious level, despite its oddities. The architecture was starkly brutalist, concrete slabs stacked like forgotten tombs against the skyline. But there was something else, something just beneath the surface of perception. Corridors seemed to bend at angles that weren't quite right. Perspectives shifted subtly as you walked, making you feel momentarily dizzy, ungrounded. It was the kind of place geometry seemed to fray at the edges. I dismissed it as poor design, the product of an era less concerned with aesthetics and more with imposing permanence. But even that felt like a weak excuse for the disquiet it provoked. And the smell. There was always a faint, underlying scent clinging to the air, a strange mix of ozone, like after a thunderstorm, and damp, decaying plaster. It wasn't overpowering, more like a persistent background note you couldn't quite tune out, strongest near the ventilation shafts and in the deeper corners of the hallways. I bought air fresheners, kept my windows slightly ajar even when it went, against my desire for seclusion, trying to combat the indefinable mustiness that felt older than the building itself. My neighbors were phantoms. I rarely saw them directly, just caught glimpses or heard muffled evidence of their existence. Mrs. Ellery in 3A, whose thin, reedy humming drifted through the vents at odd hours. Never a recognizable tune, just a dissonant, meandering sound that set my teeth on edge. Mr. Silas across the hall, an elderly man I saw maybe twice, always standing motionless by his doorway, his eyes wide and fixed on something unseen down the corridor, never acknowledging my presence. And then there were the noises from 4B, directly below me. Usually late at night, a heavy, rhythmic dragging sound, like furniture being scraped across bare concrete, followed by an unnerving silence. I never inquired. It wasn't my business. My routine was my shield. Wake, work, simple meal. Lose myself. In digital archives or the predictable narratives of old television shows, headphones firmly in place. The headphones became essential, not just for focus, but to block out it. A low-frequency hum, a static buzz that seemed to thrum just below the threshold of normal hearing. It wasn't consistent, sometimes absent for days, then returning with a subtle insistence that vibrated through the floorboards, through the very air. I blamed faulty wiring, old infrastructure, anything mundane. It was easier than considering other possibilities. It always started quietly, a barely perceptible thrumming. I'd take off my headphones sometimes, just to check, straining my ears, in the relative quiet of my apartment. The silence would feel normal for a moment, then the hum would creep back in, insidious, a baseline vibration that felt wrong. It wasn't the hum of electricity, not the drone of appliances. It felt deeper, more fundamental, like the building itself was resonating with something ancient and unpleasant. Putting the headphones back on, turning up the volume, felt like pulling a blanket over my head, a temporary refuge. The cheap rent, I reasoned, came with quirks. Old buildings groan, pipes clank, neighbors are weird. It was the price of affordable solitude in a city that demanded connection at every turn. The unsettling angles, the pervasive smell, the humming, they were just part of the package deal, the cost of maintaining my carefully constructed isolation. I was adept at ignoring things that didn't fit my desired reality. I convinced myself it was just an old, slightly decrepit building, nothing more. I needed to believe that. Looking back, the building wasn't just offering cheap rent. It was offering familiarity, a darkness that echoed something I refused to acknowledge within myself. It felt, in a terrifyingly prescient way, like coming home. The night it truly began started like any other. I'd finished my archiving work, the digital ghosts of someone else's past neatly categorized and filed away. I was microwaving a bland, pre-packaged meal, the hum of the appliance a familiar drone against the low thrum of the building's ever-present static, which seemed a little louder tonight. I sat down at my small table, scrolling through news feeds. On my phone, the blue light painting my face in the dim room. The usual cascade of distant tragedies and trivial updates washed over me, a numbing ritual. The air freshener plugged into the wall near the door puffed out its artificial pine scent, a weak defense against the deeper, mustier smell that always lingered. Suddenly, the single bare bulb overhead flickered violently. Not the usual gentle tremor, but a frantic strobe that made shadows leap and distort. My phone screen dissolved into a chaotic mosaic of colored static, the news feed replaced by jagged lines of green and purple. The microwave let out a high-pitched whine, and then died mid-cycle. The digital clock on the defunct microwave display seemed to melt, its numbers contorting into unreadable sigils for a split second before vanishing. It wasn't just a flicker. It felt like the electricity itself was spasming, convulsing. Then, the light bulb didn't just go out. It dimmed, slowly, unnervingly, sinking through shades of orange and sickly yellow until it glowed with a weak, pulsating bioluminescent quality, like a dying ember in a vast darkness. For a few seconds, this weak, wrong light was all there was, casting long, wavering shadows that seemed too solid, too independent. The static hum from the building abruptly cut off, not fading, but ceasing instantly, plunging the room into a silence far deeper and more absolute than mere quiet. It was an absorbing silence, heavy, like cotton packed into my ears, swallowing sound whole. And in that sudden, profound stillness, the smell hit me like a physical blow. The ozone and damp, decay intensified tenfold, thick and cloying, filling my lungs, stinging my nostrils. It wasn't just musty anymore. It smelled of wet earth, of something metallic like old blood, and beneath it all, the sharp electric tang of ozone, strong enough to make the hairs on my arms stand on end. It was the smell of a place neglected, yes, but also the smell of something active, something potent and wrong. Instinctively, I grabbed my phone, thumbing the screen, desperate for the familiar glow, for connection. But the screen remained dead, refusing to respond. When I finally managed to coax it into a semblance of life by holding down the power button, it wasn't the usual lock screen that greeted me. It was a chaotic scramble of symbols I didn't recognize, glyphs that seemed to writhe and shift, interspersed, with bursts of harsh digital static. No signal bars, no Wi-Fi icon, just this corrupted, meaningless data. My laptop, when I tried it, did the same. A flash of garbled code across the boot screen before shutting down again entirely. All lines to the outside world were severed, not just down, but actively corrupted. This wasn't a normal power outage. This was something else entirely. The familiar discomfort of my solitude was instantly replaced by a raw, primal fear. The silence wasn't empty. It felt watchful, coiled, waiting. The darkness wasn't just the absence of light. It felt thick, tangible, pressing in from all sides. The last vestiges of normalcy had been violently stripped away, leaving me utterly alone. In the suffocating quiet of the penumbra building, my first instinct, despite the cold dread knotting in my stomach, was to rationalize. Faulty transformer, maybe? A district-wide blackout? I fumbled for my flashlight, its beam cutting a nervous swathe through the oppressive dark. I made my way to the apartment door, heart hammering against my ribs, and opened the fuse box recessed into the hallway wall. All the breakers were in the on position. I flipped them off and on again, uselessly. No click of restored power. No comforting. Returning. Just the thick, waiting silence. Maybe it would just take time, I told myself, clinging to the mundane explanation even as every nerve screamed otherwise. I crept to the peephole, pressing my eye against the cool glass. The hallway outside was plunged into an even deeper blackness than my apartment, unrelieved by the usual emergency lighting or the slivers of light from under neighbors' doors. It was a void. Steeling myself, I unlocked the deadbolt. The sound echoed unnaturally loud in the silence, and cracked open the door. The smell was stronger out here, heavy and ancient. I shone my flashlight down the corridor. Mr. Silas's door across the hall was slightly ajar. Hesitantly, I pushed it open further. Empty. A half-eaten bowl of soup sat on a small table, a thin film already forming on its surface. It looked like he'd simply vanished mid-meal. Further down, Mrs. Ellery's door also stood open. Inside, her rocking chair swayed gently, as if recently vacated, but the apartment was deserted. The discordant humming was gone, replaced by the same suffocating silence. A flicker of movement caught my eye from the window at the end of the hall. I hurried towards it, my flashlight beam dancing nervously. Looking down at the street below confirmed my worst fear. Absolute darkness. No streetlights, no car headlights, no glowing windows from adjacent buildings. The city, usually a constant source of distant light and noise pollution, was utterly black and silent, swallowed by the night. It felt fundamentally wrong, impossible. Then I saw them. Figures emerging from the main entrance of the penumbra building below, not running, not shouting in alarm as you'd expect during an emergency. They moved with a strange, fluid gait, almost gliding, unnaturally smooth. Their faces, barely discernible in the gloom, seemed utterly blank, vacant. Some clutched suitcases, others walked empty-handed, leaving unseen lives behind without a backward glance. They moved like puppets whose strings had just been cut, drifting silently into the impenetrable darkness of the street, ignoring me completely as I watched, frozen, from the window above. The sight solidified my fear into a cold certainty. Something was terribly wrong. and leaving felt infinitely more dangerous than staying. My agoraphobia, usually a quiet burden, flared into a roaring panic at the thought of stepping into that silent, empty blackness outside. Retreating into my apartment, I slammed the door shut, ramming home every lock, sliding the chain into place. I dragged my heaviest piece of furniture, a solid oak bookshelf, grating it across the floor to barricade the entrance. Safety, however illusory, felt paramount, and that's when the hum returned. Not gradually, but instantly, louder than before. A visceral thrumming that wasn't just in the air, but seemed to emanate from the very walls. I pressed my hand against the concrete. It was unnaturally cold, almost damp, and vibrating faintly with that low, static-laced frequency. Then came the other sounds. A faint, rhythmic tapping started, seeming to come from the wall behind my couch. Tap, tap, tap. I held my breath, listening. It stopped, then started again, this time from the ceiling. Tap, 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 tap. It moved, circling the room, a delicate, maddening percussion just at the edge of hearing. Mixed with it was a sound that made my stomach churn. A wet, dragging noise, like something heavy and slick being pulled across the floorboards in the apartment above. Impossible. I was on the top floor. There was nothing above me but the roof. And beneath it all, faint at first, then growing slightly bolder, was laughter. Not human laughter, not the sound of children playing. It was distorted, echoing strangely, too high-pitched, stretching and warping like audio played through. A broken speaker, seeming to bounce off the non-Euclidean angles of the room itself. My laptop sat on the table, lid closed. On a desperate impulse, I opened it, hoping the battery still held some charge, maybe enough to find a local file, anything to distract me. The screen flickered to life, showing not my desktop, but a swirling vortex of dense gray and black static. For a terrifying instant, I thought I saw shapes moving within it, long, attenuated limbs twisting unnaturally. Then, just before the screen died completely, the static coalesced for a fraction of a second into a distorted image of my own face, eyes wide with terror, mouth open in a silent scream. I slammed the lid shut, shoving the machine away from me. Was I hallucinating? The stress, the isolation, the strange sounds. Maybe it was all in my head. I started writing notes to myself on a pad of paper, trying to anchor my thoughts. Power out. Neighbors gone. Strange noises. Stay calm. But later, when I looked back at the page, the words seemed subtly wrong. The letters slightly misshapen, almost mocking. Stay calm looked more like stay here. The feeling of being watched intensified. It wasn't coming from the windows or the peephole. It felt like eyes were embedded in the plaster, observing me from the corners of the room, from the damp patches spreading on the ceiling. The air grew heavier, charged with an unseen presence. Every creak of the building, every distant siren, I thought I heard only to realize it was silence, tightened the knot of fear in my chest. The desire to flee warred with the paralyzing terror of what lay outside, and the growing certainty that the true horror was already inside, sharing the space with me, woven into the fabric of the penumbra building itself. The tapping continued, sometimes near, sometimes far, a constant patient reminder that I was not alone. The dragging sound below, the wet slithering in the walls, the echoing giggles, they became the new background noise, the horrifying symphony of my confinement. The breaking point came hours later, or maybe days. Time had lost all meaning in the oppressive darkness and the cacophony of unsettling sounds. The tapping had become more insistent. the dragging sound below more frequent, the distorted laughter echoing almost constantly now, seeming to mock my paralysis. Enough. Even the terror of the outside void seemed preferable to this slow descent into madness within these four walls. Adrenaline finally surged, sharp and metallic, momentarily eclipsing the suffocating anxiety. I had to get out. Now. I wrenched the bookshelf away from the door, the scraping noise deafening in the charged silence. Fumbling with the locks, my hands slick with sweat, I threw the door open and plunged into the hallway, flashlight beam cutting wildly ahead. I ran for the fire escape at the end of the corridor, heart pounding like a drum against my ribs. I burst through the heavy metal door, expecting the cold night air, the rusty ladder leading down. Instead, I was back in the hallway, near my own apartment door, the fire escape door clicking shut behind me. Disoriented, gasping, I tried again, this time heading for the main stairwell. Down, 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 I stumbled, the concrete steps seeming to absorb the sound of my frantic footsteps. I reached the ground floor door, the one leading outside. I threw it open and stepped through, into the dimly lit, musty-smelling lobby of the upper floor, right where I'd started my escape attempt, staring at the door to my own barricaded apartment. The corridor seemed subtly different now. A crack, spiderwebbed across the ceiling that hadn't been there before, the paint on the wall seemed darker, peeling more aggressively. Trapped. The realization hit me with physical force. Every exit was an entrance back into the maze. Defeated, I stumbled back towards the center of the lobby, my flashlight beam shaking. It fell upon the community message board mounted on the wall, usually cluttered with mundane notices. Now, it was a tapestry of horror. Scraps of paper, torn flyers, hastily scribbled notes were pinned haphazardly, overlapping each other. Many were stained with something dark and brownish, like dried blood. The messages were frantic, desperate. Don't listen. It changes the IT, walls. The hum is its voice. Too late for us. Run. Get out before dark. And there, pinned neatly in the very center, stark white against the chaos, was a fresh piece of paper. On it, written in my own trembling, unmistakable handwriting, were 3 words: "You belong here, Kaylin." A wave of nausea washed over me. How? When? I staggered back to my apartment, the key. I had to check my unpacked suitcase. There, nestled amongst clothes I hadn't touched since moving in, cold and heavy in my palm, was the key. Not just any key. An old, tarnished brass key. Intricately patterned. I knew it instantly. It was the key to the attic room in my childhood home. The room I never entered after that day. The memory, buried for years, surged back. A feeling of cold dread. Of something fundamentally wrong. Of a presence I couldn't explain, but could never forget. The building hadn't just been waiting. It had called me here, using the echo of that old trauma as bait. Then, the whisper. It wasn't directional. It filled the air, brushing against my ears. Intimate and chilling, a chorus of voices merged into one sibilant sound. "We saved your place, Kaylin. You're finally home." The tapping against the walls exploded into violent, rhythmic pounding, shaking the entire apartment. Dust rained from the ceiling. The pressure in the air became immense, crushing, making it hard to breathe. My flashlight, clutched in my white-knuckled fist, began to flicker wildly, its beams spasming across the walls. In one terrifying, strobe-like flash of light, the illusion shattered. The plaster seemed to peel back, revealing not concrete, but something organic, pulsating. I saw them. Indistinct shapes, twisted limbs, faces contorted in silent screams, merged into the very structure of the building, and from within the decaying wall, dozens of eyes, ancient and knowing, turned slowly, fixing upon me. The smell of ozone and decay became overwhelming, a physical presence choking the air. Then, with a final pathetic sputter, my flashlight died. Darkness slammed down, absolute and complete. The pounding stopped instantly, leaving only the silence. But it was different now. The heavy, oppressive quality was gone, replaced by nothing, a void. And then, creeping back into the silence, was the hum, the low-frequency static buzz. But it wasn't coming from the walls anymore. I could feel it inside me, a deep vibration, resonating in my bones, in my teeth, syncing with the frantic beat of my own failing heart. The raw panic that had consumed me moments before drained away, leaving a strange, terrifying calm in its wake. A numb acceptance. I looked down at my hands in the residual gloom, barely visible. Was it my imagination, or did my skin look paler, stretched tighter over the bones? Did I see a faint network of dark veins just beneath the surface, mimicking the cracks spreading? Across the plaster? It didn't matter anymore. The fight was over. There was nowhere to run. No escape from the architecture of my own past and the entity it had drawn. This wasn't a place I was trapped in. It was a place I was becoming part of. From the hallway, faint but distinct, I heard it. Mrs. Ellery's dissonant humming, starting up its meandering, tuneless path. A moment later, the heavy scraping sound from apartment 4B echoed from below. The sounds that had terrified me now felt right, familiar, almost comforting in their inevitability. I dropped the useless flashlight to the floor. I wouldn't be needing it. A single thought surfaced through the internal static, clear and final. Not quite mine, but accepted as truth. It wasn't the building that was wrong. It was me, trying not to be here. Now, I'm home.